Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is China and North Korea expert Gordon G. Chang. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. He is also the author of both The Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. We want to get his insights over the mass confusion in reports in recent days on the well-being of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un, which had him anywhere from brain dead to in grave condition to just fine. So what's the likely story and why all the conflicting stories? We'll also take a look, time permitting, at how China may be trying to exploit the coronavirus pandemic. And Gordon, thanks very much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Craig.
So CNN and NBC, late on, I guess that would have been Monday evening, reported that Kim Jong-Un was in grave condition and brain dead, respectively, citing multiple unnamed sources. So is it really just hard to get the truth out of North Korea, or do they have really bad sources, or is something else going on here?
Yeah, we really don't know. I sort of believe that we're at the graver end of the spectrum than the other end. And the reason is that Kim missed the celebrations on April 15th, the Day of the Sun, which commemorates the birth of his grandfather, regime founder Kim Il-sung. Kim loves a microphone, which means that it was really unlikely that he would have skipped that unless there was a good reason. Now, there are all sorts of stories, and as the defectors from North Korea have it, it appears that it is something indeed serious and could very well be a botched brain surgery.
We know he's obese, but do we know of any other existing health problems that he's had?
Well, he had gout, which meant that he was out of circulation for about 6 weeks in 2014. We assume he has some sort of diabetes. There's smoking, which hasn't helped his respiratory condition. There's speculation that he got COVID-19, and that would make some sense, but we don't have any confirmation of that. So we won't know until we know. And that very well may be sometime down the road.
So how do we know? Do we find it out through sources? Does the regime eventually tell us if he's incapacitated or dead? I assume they'll tell us if he's dead. They did certainly with his father. But how do we eventually know this?
We'll know it when they announce a new ruling group, or Kim himself emerges from the shadows and walks around for the public. I tend to think that it will be a little bit of time. Remember that when his father died, Kim Jong-il, it took only 2 days for them to announce it. For Kim himself, if he does pass, I think it'll take much longer. And the reason is that there's no succession plan in place. And that means that senior regime figures are going to have to fight it out before they actually will announce, because they won't want to announce unless they have solidified the ruling group.
So who does that put in position to make a claim if, in fact, he's incapacitated? We know he has very young children. He's obviously had a fractured relationship with a variety of siblings. So who do you suspect would emerge if he were not able to continue?
I think it would be his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong. She is thought to be the most capable of Kim Jong-il's children. And the reason why she didn't get the nod when Kim had his stroke in 2008 and he started succession planning was because the North Korean regime is very Confucian tinged, and therefore it makes it difficult for a female to lead. This time, though, with the regime under much more stress, with the scarcity of Kim males, I think that she might actually be the one. Now, she could end up being just the regent for instance, Kim Jong-un's children. But I think he only has a daughter who's maybe 10 years old. So in that circumstance, it would be Kim Yo-jong. Of course, this is North Korea. Anything can happen. But the one thing that we do know is that the regime does need a Kim somewhere in it for legitimacy purposes.
That's what makes it different than a lot of other authoritarian regimes, correct? Is that they believe that these family members are, I don't know if they're deities in and of themselves, but they're very close to that, right?
Well, yes. Kim Il-sung was considered a deity. Kim Jong-il, maybe less so, but still divine. People have not looked at Kim Jong-un as actually a god, but, this has sort of been, it's been watered down generation to generation. But still, nonetheless, he is been glorified by state media. And that would continue for as long as he's alive.
We're talking with Gordon Chang. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. And Gordon, a couple of follow-ups here. Obviously, if this were to happen, and that's a huge if right now, we've had all these conflicting reports, they're a nuclear power. And with that much uncertainty in who comes next, where does that put the United States in preparing or dealing with this?
Well, we have operational plans to secure North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. And it's not just the nukes. They've also got chemical and biological weapons. I'm sure China has plans as well. The Chinese have been very reluctant to talk to us about contingency planning. And so there's a real risk that we would move north from South Korea. The Chinese would move south off of their border. And we just don't know what would happen when the two armies meet. I tend to think, though, Greg, that in this particular case, China and the United States may be very cautious and may not move across the borders just because they don't feel that they would have the capability of actually affecting good outcomes on the ground in North Korea.
Gordon, one of the reasons that most people seem to think this was a false alarm and that for the most part, Kim is either okay or he will be okay is because that's what the South Koreans are saying. As you have shared with us many times in recent months, South Korea's approach, particularly with this leader, is very different than we've seen from previous leaders. So to what extent do you trust the statements coming out on this issue from South Korea?
Yeah, I don't trust the South Korean statements at all. And it's not like we have a lot of information, but what is concerning is that South Korea is putting on a full media press, and they seem really determined and relentless to pursue a particular narrative. And whenever you see that, you just got to be concerned that that narrative is indeed not accurate. So in this particular case, it almost convinces me that something is wrong when South Korea says things are okay.
That's a very chilling statement right there, given how closely in messaging the United States and South Korea historically have been, but that's obviously changed.
It has changed. Moon Jae-in is very pro-North Korean, pro-China, very anti-American. And so although we have the alliance and although I think we can outlast him, this is a time of stress between Washington and Seoul.
Two quick questions before we let you go, Gordon. First of all, you mentioned at least the rumor that Kim Jong-Un may have gotten coronavirus. We don't know any details on that, but obviously in our country and in many Western nations, we have detailed coronavirus statistics down to the county. No surprise we're not getting anything like that from the North Koreans. Do you have any evidence, anecdotally or otherwise, that coronavirus has been a problem in the country as a whole?
Well, there have been quarantines of foreign diplomats in North Korea, which would contradict their position that there's no coronavirus in the country. North Korea would seem to be particularly vulnerable to that because they share that border with China. There have been so many crossings, official and unofficial. And so, and also North Korea doesn't have a very well-developed public health system. So, you would think that they would be among the hardest hit societies anywhere. And I think that's probably going to be the case when we find out. But of course, information has been pretty sparse on this, especially because the regime is sensitive about it.
In our last remaining moments here, Gordon, let's move over across the border into China now, which of course has been engaged in a disinformation campaign about the coronavirus for weeks and even months now, about how it started, when it was discovered to be transmissible between humans. Now, of course, they say they have no new internal cases, and any new cases are brought in by folks from the outside. But as you look at the bigger picture here, how do you see the Chinese trying to leverage this, whether it's against the United States or others around the world? So even though it originated there, how are they trying to use this for their advantage long term?
Well, they're still continuing their disinformation campaign, which is inflammatory. They're trying to use donations to establish the notion that China is a generous state. But also, we have seen some very disturbing comments from Chinese diplomats. So, for instance, China's ambassador to France was called on the carpet by the French a couple days ago for comments he made about the way the French were handling coronavirus patients who are elderly. Also, there's a Chinese diplomat who suggested that Kazakhstan wanted to become a part of the People's Republic, which is a really bold and obviously untrue statement. So Beijing has a dual track, trying to entice countries with sweet statements, but also being incredibly audacious and hostile.
A lot to keep track of, and this is going to be unfolding for a long time. Gordon, as always, we thank you very much for your time and your expertise.
Well, thank you so much, Greg.
Absolutely. Gordon G. Chang, China and North Korea expert. Find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. He's also the author of The Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.